If we've learned anything about the cross these last few weeks, at a minimum, we would have to say this: the cross is messy. It was messy. At best, we need to admit that something's happened that day that we just don't fully understand. And that's kind of what we're going to look at today. Yet, the cross for many has become something that has influenced their theological or doctrinal stances, which it should shape those things. But it must not just be limited to shaping our understanding, but it should also shape our heart on how we see people, on how we love people. You see, when the cross touches our heads only and not our heart, what we do is we strip the cross of God's intention and we lose sight. We lose sight that the gospel is good news to all people at all times. And so when the cross of Christ has become anything other than what God intended it to, it will lead us to a sense of spiritual pride, void of the power that can transform lives. I have a short video clip. It's probably 3 minutes, 15 seconds long. And I came across this clip, and it's in reference to the thieves on the cross. And I thought, well, I could just say the same things that Alistair Bagg says, but he says it in a cool British accent. So if you want to watch this, we have a quick video clip.
The preaching of the cross. Without preaching the cross to ourselves all day and every day, we will very, very quickly revert to faith plus works as the ground of our salvation. So that, to go to the old Fort Lauderdale question, if you were to die tonight and you were getting entry into heaven, what would you say? If you answer that, and if I answer it in the first person, we've immediately gone wrong. Because I believed, because I have faith, because I am this, because I am continuing. Loved ones, the only proper answer is in the third person, because he. Think about the thief on the cross. And what an immense, I can't wait to find that fellow one day to ask him, how did that shake out for you? Because you were cussing the guy out with your friend. You'd never been in a Bible study. You never got baptized. You didn't know a thing about church membership. And yet you made it. You made it. How did you make it? That's what the angel must have said, like, what are you doing here? Well, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Well, because I don't know. Well, excuse me, let me get my supervisor. They go get the supervisor, Ranger. So, we're just a few questions for you. First of all, are you clear on the doctrine of justification by faith? The guy said, I never heard of it in my life. And what about, let's just go to the doctrine of Scripture immediately. This guy's just staring. And eventually, in frustration, he says, on what basis are you here? And he said, the man on the middle cross said, I can come. Now, that is the only answer. That is the only answer. And if I don't preach the gospel to myself all day and every day, then I will find myself beginning to trust myself, trust my experience, which is part of my fallenness as a man. If I take my eyes off the cross, I can then give only lip service to its efficacy, while at the same time living as if my salvation depends upon me. And as soon as you go there, it will lead you either to abject despair or a horrible kind of arrogance. And it is only the cross of Christ that deals both with the dreadful depths of despair and the pretentious arrogance of the pride of man that says, I can figure this out and I'm doing wonderfully well. No, because the sinless Savior died, my sinful soul is counted free, for God the just is satisfied to look on him and pardon me. That's why Luther says most of your Christian life is outside of you, in this sense, that we know that we're not saved by good works. We're not saved as a result of our professions, but we're saved as a result of what Christ has achieved.
He said it a lot better than I could have said it, and in a much cooler accent. But this week, what I want to do is I want us to focus on the man on the middle cross. Just to slow down and allow God to do what only he can do. And what we will see is how Jesus becomes hope for those who've been forsaken. We'll see how Jesus becomes hope for those who are the outsiders, and that he is the hope for those who are dealing with disappointment. And so, as we look at verses 45 through 50, we're going to look at hope for the forsaken. And it says, "Now from the 6th hour until the 9th hour, there was darkness over all the land." Now, what we need to understand is the 6th hour to the 9th hour would have been from noon to 3 in the afternoon. That's what that time frame would be. And what we know about this darkness is it was an unusual darkness that lasted for 3 hours. It's much longer than any eclipse would have ever lasted. But it was this supernatural darkness that came upon, and it's interesting because it said it came over the whole land. The word land is the word G in the Greek, which we get our word geography, meaning that it covered the whole earth. So, in other words, the whole world went dark. Think about that for a moment. We're not talking a little bit of darkness. I don't know if you've ever been anywhere where it was just so dark it was eerie. I remember my first trip to Africa. I remember, it's funny because I was looking back at my journal, and I remember I was there for like 3 weeks, and I was like, I have not seen the moon since I've been here. And they don't have streetlights in Africa. And they have weird animals in Africa. And I remember walking around, and it was dark. And it was almost, it was like so dark, you could just like almost cut it. And there was just something about it. But what do we know? Here's what we know. While the earth went dark this day, while darkness was everywhere, Jesus was at work in the midst of the darkness. We don't have to be afraid of the darkness. What we need to understand, the hope that we have is this, that Jesus does his best work in our darkest times. Let us hold on to that. Let that be our foundation, because it goes on in verse 46. At about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," that is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Some of those who stood by there, when they heard him say that, they said, "This man is calling for Elijah." Immediately, one of them ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on a reed, and offered it to him to drink. The rest said, "Let him alone. Let us see if Elijah will come and save him." And Jesus cried out with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. When the darkness lifted, what happened? But Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus, who is God, who's part of the Trinity, who was in perfect unity with God, the Godhead, for a moment in time, was forsaken by the Father. He's quoting Psalm chapter 22 here. Psalm chapter 22 is a prophetic psalm speaking of the cross. But I hope that you don't just stop there and say, well, I know what Jesus was quoting from the cross that day. I hope you will step back. You'll have your heart broken and you will ask this question: how could God the Father forsake God the Son in his greatest time of need? I hope you will ask that question. You see, it's easy for us to say, well, I know why God forsook him, because a holy God can't look upon sin. And so he had to turn, as it were, his face from the Son, because he became sin for us. Much more. You see, there's a mystery that takes place here on the Father forsaking his only Son. And it's so deep that I don't think we can totally understand it. But yet, what we can know is that Jesus understands what it's like to have their Father forsake them. He understands what it's like when his dad wasn't there. But the gospel says that the darkness of being forsaken only lasts a short time. Good news says that while on the cross, Jesus associated with those who have been forsaken, those forsaken sons and daughters, but he didn't stop there. He also accomplished the means necessary to bring about a restoration and a reconciliation between fathers and their children. I understand what it's like to be a son who wondered why their dad wasn't there. To feel forsaken by my dad. I understand the pain, the agony, the wonder. I understand that when I would go to church and they tried their best, and they're like, hey, let's have our father-son BB gun shootout, and like I don't have a dad. Well, we have a grandpa that'll step in. Well, thanks, but that's not my dad. And they're having to face that rejection and the depths of that rejection, time in and time out, day in and day out, wondering why the dad who should have been there, that should have been loving me, wasn't. But fast forward to 1992, when God did something and brought about a restoration between my dad and I. It didn't change the past, but it sure impacted the future. God did something that only he could do. Jesus made something possible that only he could do, but it meant that he had to associate with our being forsaken by having the Father forsake him. And I'll tell you this, my dad's story today, though he's ashamed of his past, he doesn't let it paralyze him. He's walking in restoration. You see, our failures don't have to be the end of our story, guys. That's the beauty of this. Maybe you've been a dad that has not been there for your kids. That doesn't have to be the end of your story. Today, the gospel is giving you hope that what Jesus accomplished on the cross made redemption and reconciliation possible. You see, when Jesus cried out, we're told he cried out, "It is finished," in John chapter 19, verse 30, which is the Greek word tetelestai, which means paid in full. The price of reconciliation was paid in full. So what do we have to do in it? We just embrace it and walk in it. That's what we do. What's paid in full? The price of restoration with the Father. So if you're the Father or the Son, the good news is this: what Jesus finished on the cross that day offers you hope that your story could end with redemption. The second thing that we're going to see is that Jesus offers hope for the outsider in verses 51 through 56. It says, "Then, behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth quaked, and the rocks were split, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. So when the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and the things that had appeared, they feared greatly, saying, 'Truly, this was the Son of God.'" In Exodus chapter 19, when the law came down to Moses, the earth shook. And here it is shaking again. I wonder if they're sitting there thinking, "Oh no, what's going on?" Charles Spurgeon put it this way. He said, "It is not a slight rent through which we may see a little," speaking of the veil, "but it is rent from top to bottom. There is an entrance made for the greatest sinners. If there had only been a small hole cut through it, the lesser offenders may have crept through. But what an act of abounding mercy is this, that the veil is rent in the midst and rent from top to bottom, so that the chief of sinners may find ample passage." So when we look at this, we have to admit that, you know what? There was some crazy stuff that took place this day. Don't you think? Not only was the veil torn from top to bottom, but dead people came back to life. Like, what was that like? How did that happen? Like, talk about freaky. Like, are we talking a zombie apocalypse? I don't know. Like, this is nuts. Anyway, there's certain things that we're just not going to understand that took place. That is one of them. Don't know how, just know it happened. But you know what I love about this? It's as if God is saying the old way is no longer how we do things around here. I love that. With the veil ripping from top to bottom, the old way is not how we do things. Again, even more surprising is the graves were open. What does it mean? The dead came to life and walked on the earth. How? Don't know. Don't know. And there's some things that we're never going to know. But here's what we do know. We're free. It's finished. The veil is rent from top to bottom. The price was paid in full. We can access the God who loves us. And then there was the centurion. He would have been a guy over 100 men. He would have been a tough guy. He would have been a fighter. He would have been one of those warrior types. And what does he do? He confesses that Jesus was truly the Son of God. He saw everything going on, and he's like, truly, this is the Son of God. So think with me for a moment. Who was there this day when Jesus was crucified? We had men and women, Jews and Gentiles, rich and poor, high class and no class, religious and irreligious, guilty and innocent, haters of Jesus and lovers of Jesus, oppressors and the oppressed, those weeping and those mocking. You had educated and uneducated. You had the deeply moved. You had the indifferent. You had different races, nationalities, language, and classes. And as the veil was torn and the earth shook, God proclaimed that the good news is that the outsider doesn't have to be an outsider any longer. They could come in at any time. So when the writer of Hebrews tells us this in Hebrews 4:14 through 16, it made this all possible. Seeing then that we have a great high priest who passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession, for we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weakness, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us, therefore, come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Guys, we can come whenever we need to the presence of Almighty God. And this is our invitation. Because no longer are we outsiders, but we've been invited in. And then finally, we're going to see that Jesus offers hope for those dealing with disappointments. It says, and many women who followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him, were there looking on from afar. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. So here are these women who once were close to Jesus, once serving alongside him, once ministering to his needs. All of a sudden, they find themselves looking from afar. No longer were they close, but they were afar. They were far from him. Looking and gazing and wondering. Trying to figure out answers for their disappointments. This isn't the way I thought it was going to be. They find themselves just looking, wondering. Verse 57. Now when evening had come, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who himself had also become a disciple of Jesus. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate commanded the body to be given to him. When Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth and laid it in his new tomb, which he had hewn out of the rock, and he rolled a large stone against the door of the tomb and departed. And so as the day comes to a close, Jesus' lifeless body was handed over to Joseph because he came asking for it, that he might put it in the new tomb. As the ladies sat there in disappointment, Joseph was wondering what he could do. John's gospel tells us that Nicodemus was with Joseph. And so here these two disciples who came on a little bit later took the body of Jesus and put it in the tomb. It's interesting to me because what these two show us is this, that everybody can play a part in what God is doing. Have you ever felt like, well, you know what, I have nothing to offer the Lord. I have nothing to give to Jesus. What Joseph reminds us is that serving the Lord doesn't have to be some big ordeal. It's just taking what you have and using it. You see, serving the Lord is asking oneself, God, here's what I have. Here's my time, my talents, my treasures. How can I use them to make you famous? That's it. That's it. Maybe you're sitting here thinking, well, you know what? I don't feel like I do too much for the Lord. I don't think I do anything. I haven't walked on water very often. Haven't healed a whole lot of lepers lately. Haven't been really vocal about my job, about my faith. That's okay. Today, are you willing to take your time, talents, and treasures and say, God, here they are, use them for your fame? Seize the opportunity when it shows up. That's what Joseph did. The opportunity afforded itself. He stepped up. Boom. It's simply this. Be prepared to get back on your rocking chair. Rock babies. Rock babies until Jesus is made famous. Just keep rocking. Right? We're going to play this song. Just keep rocking, rock. Yeah, anyway, sorry. But here, Jesus is laid in the tomb. What happens? They sealed the tomb. It was customary. We know that a rich man like Joseph probably had this tomb carved into the solid rock. We know that it was in a garden near where the crucifixion took place. This tomb would have they would have had a small entrance with multiple compartments in it. And what would happen is a body was laid in there, left there for a few years till everything decomposed. Then they would go in, collect the bones, put them in boxes, and put them in some of these different storage areas. And that's how multiple family members could use the same tomb. And then the tomb had that typically heavy circular-shaped stone rolled in front of it that would take some muscle to move it. But here's the interesting thing. We could sit here and we could know all the facts about a tomb, but we'll miss out on so much if that's all we know. You see, what we need to understand is what was placed in that tomb that day. Yes, it was Jesus' body who was placed in that tomb, and he was covered with that big stone. But sealed in that tomb, placed in the tomb that day, was Jesus, who was supposed to set Israel free from her oppressors. The Messiah that they were hoping for was sealed in that tomb that day. Shattered dreams and hopes were there facing these people day in and day out every time they walked past it. And not to mention, what would have the ramifications been for Joseph to take the body that day? He'd come to celebrate the Passover, but in touching the body of Jesus, he would have become ceremonially unclean and unable to celebrate the Passover. But it goes on, verse 61. And Mary Magdalene was there, and the other Mary sitting opposite the tomb. You see, sealed in the tomb was all these disappointments and Jesus and the Messiah and the hopes and the dreams that were shattered. Outside, you have two women who had to deal with their disappointments. And as if that wasn't enough, look what happens next on verse 62. On the next day, which followed the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered together to Pilate, saying, "Sir, we remember while he was still alive how the deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise. Therefore command that the tomb be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away and say to the people, he has risen from the dead.' So the last deception will be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard. Go your way. Make it as secure as you know how." So they went and made the tomb secure, sealing the stone and setting the guards. And so as if shattered dreams weren't enough, guards were placed in front of the tomb, and the security all around it was like anything that they had seen before. All because they wanted to keep Jesus down. What do you think the people thought as they walked by the tomb those next couple days? I mean, if you were hoping that Jesus was who he said he was, this would almost be a mockery, wouldn't it? He's not coming out. Just adding pain to their disappointment. Now, we have the luxury of knowing what would take place 3 days later. But even knowing that Jesus is our resurrected King, when we're faced with disappointments, how quickly do we forget? You see, this is where the gospel offers for those facing disappointment and even impossibilities. It offers us hope. You see, even when I don't understand what's going on, we can know this: Jesus is not caught off guard. When Jesus woke up 3 days later in the tomb, he wasn't like, how did I get here? This isn't what I expected. No, he took his cloth off and, all right, let's go. We got this. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't caught off guard. Why? Because he has the power to overcome even the grave. He has the power to overcome even the darkness of days. And so today, maybe you're like the woman at the tomb. You're dealing with disappointment. Jesus didn't show up the way you thought he was. Things didn't go the way you hoped they would. Maybe you're feeling like an outsider and you have no idea how or where you fit in to the body of Christ. Maybe you're dealing with the reality of being abandoned. Or maybe the days just seem so dark to you. Guys, what I want you to remember is that the man on the middle cross does his best work in darkest circumstances. And he is saying to you today that disappointment doesn't have to be the end of your story. Jesus is saying that because he tore the veil from top to bottom, you are invited into his presence, where you can find hope that will overcome your disappointments. That you could find restoration in relationships that you never thought could ever be restored. And I want to leave you guys with this. If anyone ever questions you, why are you here? What are you doing? Simply tell them that the man on the middle cross told me I could be here. He invited me to come. And guys, when we go out, let us be those that are the mouthpiece of the man on the middle cross. And may we tell people that if you're disappointed, if you're dealing with disappointments, if days are dark, if you don't feel like you fit in, Jesus, the man on the middle cross, is inviting you to come, because the veil is torn and the gospel is still good news. And God does his best work in the darkest moments.